Welcome, my friends, to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, and I'm thrilled you're joining me today for a fun conversation with a passionate author. We're kicking off the program, like it's our tradition, with a short reading from the feature book. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get started.
My name is Francesca Maria, and I'm going to read to you from my short story collection that just came out. It's called They Hide, Short Stories to Tell in the Dark. And this particular story is called My Brother Andy, and it's part autobiographical. We never talked about the haunting in our house, at least not until we were adults. Witnessing my bedroom closet opening on its own accord became one of my earliest and most pervasive childhood memories. My sister Anna remembers sharing the room with me and watching my terror as I learned what she had already discovered about the thing in the closet. Before I came along, she had been in that room alone for 6 years. She knew quite well that something lingered in that closet, but she never dared talk about it. The strange occurrences in our house intensified over time. Closed doors rattling, scratching sounds from inside the walls, whispers under the bed, footsteps in the attic, toys coming to life. Many of my scariest experiences happened around age 7. I frequently found myself trapped in the downstairs bathroom. When I tried to open the door, the handle jammed and I wouldn't budge, trapping me for what felt like hours. Something I couldn't see or touch attached itself to my back and breathed hot air on my naked skin. I panicked, crying and screaming for someone to come to my aid. Eventually, one of my parents would hear my cries and rescue me. The doorknob had a simple push-button lock with no key. It puzzled my dad as to how it got lodged so many times. He would have to unscrew the doorknob from its base and remove all the components in order to set me free. He replaced that doorknob over a dozen times. To this day, I still don't understand why it only targeted me in the bathroom. My oldest sister, Terry, had a bedroom upstairs in an isolated part of the house. Her room scared me the most because it bordered the attic.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm hoping you got goosebumps like I did with this reading because we're going to jump right in. If you are new to the podcast, remember, we're here to provide you with some insight and some passionate authors. If you want to see the edited version of the videos or just join the community, go ahead, click on the link, join the Patreon. You're going to love what you find inside. So let's jump in. Good morning, madam. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fantastic. How are you doing?
I am so happy and thrilled. Thank you so much for joining us. You mentioned this is part autobiographical.
It is.
I got goosebumps. So tell us about this book. What is it about? Give us an insight. Bring us in.
Sure. So it's my COVID baby. I've been writing since the age of 6. I'm now nearly 50. I started writing at an early age because I did grow up in a haunted house. And writing was my only outlet to kind of express myself since we never talked about it growing up. If we talked about what was haunting us, it got worse. And so writing was really my only outlet. I've been writing my whole life, but really never published. I kind of wrote for myself, tend to write scary stuff. That's some of the stuff that I love to read, Stephen King, Anne Rice, Clive Barker. And so a lot of my writing kind of emulates them as well. During COVID, like most of us, had a lot of panic, a lot of anxiety, didn't know what was going to happen. And so I naturally gravitated towards my go-to therapy, which was writing. And so I started writing. I've had this idea for a couple of decades, actually, of writing a collection of short stories based on horror tropes. So main horror themes, so witches, vampires, ghosts, possession, And so I wanted to try to see if I had something new to say about each of those horror tropes. So my collection, They Hide Short Stories to Tell in the Dark, collects 13 tales. And it's kind of my take on a witch story, my take on a vampire story, a werewolf story, a zombie stories in there. Most of it's fiction. There's just a little sliver of it that I snuck in there from my experience growing up in a haunted house.
Because I'm a scary cat. Let me just put it out there. This whole concept of haunted houses, I was like, I'm like terrified just to think about it. But you honestly grew up in this house. So when you were putting this story together, how were you able to handle reliving those memories and bringing them to life without re-victimizing yourself and living this trauma? How did that work?
That's a great question. So writing for me has always been very empowering. When I was growing up, I was helpless, I was hopeless, and very powerless. Now that I've got the pen in my hand, I can dictate the characters, the outcome. I get to control the ending. I get to control what happens. So it's very empowering. I get to have my little 6-year-old self write her own ending. And so it's very healing for me.
Just on a personal note, please tell me you eventually got out of this house. Like,
Oh,
when
yeah,
did
yeah.
this? Oh, thank God. I was like, when did this happen? When did you guys finally say, okay, this house is a little too much for us?
Yeah. So I was 0 to 14 living in that house. My parents never admitted that it was haunted. We grew up really strict Catholic, and that wasn't part of their belief system. And so they never acknowledged what was going on in the house, even though, lights were going on and off, TVs going on and off, doors were slamming. They saw it, but they just like blew it off as it's a, creaky house. The house is settling. And so we moved out when I was an early teenager, but not because the house was haunted. It was because my parents just wanted to move out of the area.
So I'm Catholic. I'm trying to figure this out. They didn't have a priest come in and be like, you need to just bless this house. Put some holy water.
Yep. Well, as a good Catholic, you always have the priest over every once in a while. You serve them dinner and they bless the house. And we had that done a couple of times. It didn't do any good.
As an adult, did you ever decide to go back and figure out what is definitely wrong with this house?
Yes, I've been obsessed and kind of fascinated with it ever since. What was interesting is it was a brand new home. So nobody had lived in it before, and it was a whole new complex in that area. So I did a little research, and the indigenous people at the time, hundreds and hundreds of years prior, used to bury their dead on hillsides. And I lived in one of 2 hills in a small town called Pinole, which is about an hour east of San Francisco in California. And so my theory is maybe there might have been some indigenous land that we occupied and didn't know it at the time.
I'm trying to figure it out because I'm with you. It's like at some point I'm like, I would like to know what and who was there, especially for a brand new house, because that's even more terrifying. It's like, okay, what happened? Like, what is going on? As you went through your journey in writing, because I love the fact that you became empowered through writing, because sometimes a lot of aspiring authors don't realize the power that you have when you take on this universe. Right. What was the first thing you discovered about writing that helped you heal?
That I could express myself in a way that I couldn't in other outlets. So again, growing up, it wasn't acceptable to talk about it. And so that part of my processing was shut off. And so when I can write about my feelings, it's a really eye-opening experience for me, because a lot of times I'm not even aware of how I feel until I see it on the page. The first story in my collection, it's called The Wisterfield Murders, and it takes place in a Salem-like kind of colonial New England town. And I wrote it as my witch story. And I put a lot of my feelings of powerlessness, of fear, of lack of control in that story unconsciously. It was one of the first stories I wrote during the height of COVID. And after I put the story down and started going back and editing it, I realized, wow, I didn't realize that's how I was feeling. And it was pretty intense and very visceral. It's kind of almost like seeing yourself in a mirror, but I was seeing myself in the printed word. So it was pretty eye-opening for me.
I love that you're able to take it, see it, and then be able to recognize it in terms of like, okay, this is a huge piece of me that is in my works. You got 13 different ways of tales of how you saw the horror, the supernatural, because I do urban fantasy. So you're talking my world. How did you manage to spin all these different tropes and what we think into something that you're like, this is really how I feel about it? How did you do that?
Well, I just took one story at a time and I just asked myself, how do I feel about a witch as a trope? How do I feel about a vampire as a trope? And I'm not one of those plotters, I'm a pantser, which means I just kind of let the story tell itself. So I have a theme of like, I want to talk about or have a story about a vampire, but I really don't know where it's going, how it's going to end, even where we are in location. So a lot of times I'll just close my eyes and just start writing what I see in my head. And honestly, that's kind of how my stories develop. One of my stories, it's called A Game of Ghosts. It started from a dream. So I had this really visceral dream probably about a decade ago of this little girl in a park who goes up a slide in a playground, but doesn't come out the other end. And so that kind of spurred my whole story about a ghost. And it wasn't something that I had pre-planned. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know where it was going, but I started writing it. And as I wrote it, the characters came alive, the setting came alive, and the story really kind of wrote itself. So a lot of times when I'm writing in a good way, I'm a little bit possessed by the story. And so I'm just kind of type as fast as the story dictates.
Oof, that is powerful and very much like a little creepy. I'm so happy that you enjoy this genre because I would be like, I won't sleep for a month. I'm sorry that something's going to have to happen. This is not letting me sleep. I absolutely love it. So for the collection you put together, what are your readers are thinking about? Are they going, oh my God, I'm surprised, or like, give me more? What has been the take of it?
It's fascinating. So I've told some of my friends who've read it, it's like a good Rorschach test because all of the stories are so uniquely different. I tried to flex different writing muscles. So one of them is epistolary, told by letters and police reports. Some are in first person present, some are in third person past. So there's different takes on it. And each story is told in a different kind of style as well. So you get a different sense of voice. And so they're all very, even though they're tied together by this idea of monsters, each of them is very unique and distinct. So I'm always fascinated to hear which story resonates with which kind of people. It's almost like telling me a little bit more about them by which story they gravitate towards. A lot of my horror friends seem to like that Game of Ghost story that I mentioned because I think it's that unique epistolary way of telling a story, which is not through one perspective, but multiple points of view.
You jumping back and forth from one style to another in the same collection is really fun because it almost makes you feel like you have multiple writers in the same world. That is very, very exciting for people. So if anybody who is listening is going, oh my God, this sounds really much up my alley, you got to pick it up because being able to change topics. I have friends who don't like first person. I have other people who would die for it. So you have a little bit of everything. Tell us, what else have you been working on? What other master projects do you have in the making?
Sure, yeah. So I am the creator and writer of a comic book series called Black Cat Chronicles. They are true tales of horror narrated by a black cat. And so we've had 3 issues so far through my publishing arm with my husband called Black Cat Publishing. The first issue takes place in Scotland. It's called Greyfriars Cemetery, and everything in that book is true. It is this horrific story of hauntings, possessions, torture, plague, grave robbing, all taking place in Scotland. The second issue is on Alaska, a little town called Port Chatham, Alaska, that up and goes missing out of nowhere because they were plagued by Bigfoot. And then the third issue, which we just put out, is called Invasion Antarctica. And it takes place right around World War II, where the Nazis, followed by the Brits, followed by US, had really tremendous secret military operations in Antarctica. And they found some really incredible stuff down there that still is a secret to this day. So we've got a mysterious black cat that narrates and takes the reader through each of these tales.
How much research did you have to do to come up with all this information?
So much, months and months and months. Yeah, it took probably 5 times longer to research it than it did to write it.
I think it's super amazing because most people don't understand how much work it goes into a graphic novel.
Yep.
And you're taking one that is based on real facts. What made you decide to do that project?
So my husband and I owned a comic book store for 19 years called Black Cat Comics. And so we've been big fans of comics forever. As you can probably see, I've got a bunch of Neil Gaiman stuff, who's one of my favorite artists or authors of all time. So we've been big fans. And so we got to a point where I wanted to start writing comics that I wanted to read. There wasn't a lot of horror comics that were really good quality, in my opinion, that I wanted to pick up and offer to my customers, and stuff that I wanted to read. I hadn't seen something like that before. And so we're like, hey, we've been in this business for 19 years. Why don't we take a stab and see if we can write our own? My husband's the publisher, I'm the writer. And then we hired this amazing artist called Nate Olson, who does this realistic art style. And it's absolutely fantastic. And all that's on my website for people to check out.
I am so thrilled that you decide to just, hey, I'm going to venture into different kind of genres, different projects, and kind of go with it. So the fact that you guys run a comic book, beautiful. The fact that you decided to be like, you know what? We have enough experience in this business. Let's bring something that our customers and our audience are going to love. I think it's amazing. Giving you huge props for the fact that you have to do all this research and you're still doing it. Because after a while, you're like, you could have just finished a couple novels in the time that it took you to do that.
I could have. Yeah, I could have. Yeah, one issue unfortunately takes me about a year to do. It's quite intensive.
I believe you, just for the amount of research and putting it all together. Yeah. Besides the collection of graphic novels, what else are you working on?
So I've got another probably 30 or so short stories that I'm waiting for them to get into anthologies. Some of them are going to be published later this year. Some of them I'm looking for homes. Some of them I'm thinking about putting together another collection. I'm also kind of toying around with the idea of a novel. I'm not sure. I've got a couple of different ideas based on my short story collection they had, things I might expand on a little further, but nothing has solidified in my head just yet.
Thinking is the pantser in you. It's kind of like what comes to you guys. I'm a plotter, so to me, it was like, oh, that's a lot of stress. My muse leaves me at page 30. So the fact that you guys write an entire collection of stuff is like, your muse is much more dedicated. You mentioned Neil Gaiman. I'm switching a little bit from the books and the works that you have to the writer. Mm-hmm. Inspiration besides Neil, who has actually motivated you to become this author?
Great question. So Neil Gaiman, for sure, he's first and foremost. I've read everything he's written and have met him several times. He's phenomenal person. And as I mentioned before, growing up, I got exposed to Stephen King early, and Salem's Lot was one of my first horror novels that I read. But even before that, as a little kid, I would read a lot of Nancy Drew and a lot of Trixie Belden, which was kind of a similar, but more of like an 80s take on a Nancy Drew. So kind of girl mystery solver, going out there and understanding like who was haunting the house, or was that really a witch? And so I was really inspired early on by those young adult kind of paranormal, supernatural mysteries.
You have been doing this for a while. So you have a lot of experience, both as a reader, as a writer. What advice would you give an up and coming author that's like, I would love to do this, I don't know where to start?
So for me, it's about, I know I write fiction and I write stuff that's unbelievable, but everything that I write comes from a place of authentic honesty and realism for myself. So you can create all kinds of fantastical environments, but in order to really put yourself on the page, you've got to, almost bleed on the page, put yourself into it, put your own heart, put your own emotions, put your own sense of fear or love or excitement onto the page. You don't need to write about yourself, but you need to write about something real and authentic every single time you sit down and put something together on page.
Oof, that is very, very powerful. Sometimes we're trying to write to market. And I've seen a lot of authors that says, I'm going to write to market. And they kind of dissociate themselves from the story. And they kind of pretend to try to just fit and the whole demographic that they might not be true to who they are. So I love the fact that you says be authentic. Just put yourself in there
Yeah.
as you're writing your stories because you have so many different styles. Do you have a favorite? I really wanted to know that.
I've been asked this question a couple of times in general, and my snarky answer is the last thing I've ever written should be my favorite thing if I'm continuing to progress like I want to. And sometimes that's true, and sometimes not so much. That's my goal, though. That's my goal. But in my collection, I would have to say the last story I wrote, which is the one at the tail end, it's called The Gathering. That one holds a special place in my heart. The Gathering came out of a submission call. So there was an anthology where we were asked to write a story based on monsters having human fears. So instead of us as humans being terrified of the vampire, it's the vampire being terrified in some ways of the human. And so that spurred an idea in my head. And so I started writing this short story. It's actually a novella, it's pretty long, called The Gathering, where all of the ghouls and goblins from all over the world gather on the shortest night of the year to share their human stories of what happened in that year. And it's a contest. Who can tell the best horrific human story wins a prize at the end.
I'm having so much fun talking to you because that sounds really interesting. Sometimes we are the biggest monsters out there besides the ones that we imagine. So I think that's pretty interesting. Do you have a favorite style of writing that you enjoy more than others? Because in this collection, you have done it all.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have one that you prefer more than others?
You know, it's a great question. I don't, because my answer would be whatever feels best for the story. I don't like to stick to anything. I don't want to be too rigid. I need to be flexible and I need to be open to how the story wants to be told. And so as long as it feels right for the story, that's the best style for it. So I don't have a particular favorite. I just let the story dictate how it wants to be written.
What made you decide to start working on short mediums instead of sticking to a novel?
Frankly, novels terrify me. Talking about our fears. I don't know that I have a subject, a character, a setting. Since I'm a pantser, not a plotter, I don't know that I have something that can take me into the realm of 100,000 words or more. My collection is 13 different stories. It's about a little over 60,000 words. And that took a lot out of me to kind of get to that number and to get to that many stories. So I would love to try my hand at a novel, but I feel like I need to keep working on my craft a little more before I'd feel comfortable doing that. So maybe 2 to 5 years, you can ask me again, and I'd say, yes, I've got something coming. But for now, I'm still working on my craft.
I so appreciate the fact that you're not shutting it down. You're not going, no, I'm never going to do that. But you're very much come to us like, hey, I'm there. It's a work in progress. And you will know when the right time comes in. So yes. So, Madame, where can our listeners find you? Where they can find the books, where they can learn more about you and your comic books? Tell us.
So everything is off my website, which is francescamaria.com. It's FrancescaMaria.com. You can get all of my books, my comics. You can read more about my haunted house. And there's a lot of short stories that I've posted on my website that are outside of the collection that you can read there as well.
I love it. So, Madame, before you can leave us, are you ready for the lightning round?
Sure, yes.
All right, super easy. Do not think too much about this. Let's see how you do.
Okay.
Sweet or sour?
Sweet.
Okay. Wizard or pirate?
Wizard.
Me too. City or country?
City.
Not bad. Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Me too. I knew you were a lady after my own heart. Here's a little different. Let's see how you handle this one. If your life had a theme song, what would it be?
Oh, that's good. The only thing that comes to mind, I'm an old punk rocker. So the only thing that comes to mind is Minor Threat's song, I'm Not Your Stepping Stone.
I like, that's a really good one. Fabulous. Do you have any closing remarks for us, Madame?
Just thank you so much. This has been so much fun and I really enjoy spending the morning with you. So thank you.
It has been an absolute pleasure. Congratulations on the books. Listeners, you need to go pick it up. It's going to keep you at the edge of your seat. I have goosebumps, but I do know a couple of people that actually need this book. So I will be sending them some information of you have to pick this up. Thank you. Thank you so much. Congratulations. Please stay in touch. We want to hear all about your amazing success.
Thank you. Will do. I really appreciate it.
Thank you to our listeners. Make sure to go ahead, follow us, like, share this podcast. You know, we're always better when we're growing together. And then remember, if you want to join the Patreon community, click on the link. We'll be back next week with another amazing authors. Bye, everyone.